What would you do if the people who threw you out of their house walked into your office years later asking for help? Not to apologize, not to explain, but to ask you to save them. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. That's exactly what happened to Elena Carter. And the most unbelievable part? The same parents who once told her she had destroyed the family name now needed her more than anyone else in the world. But they didn't know something. Something that would make their faces go pale before the meeting was even over. Let me take you to that moment. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in downtown Chicago. The kind of afternoon where the city seemed to move in slow motion behind the glass walls of the 32nd floor. Elena Carter sat at the wide oak desk in her corner office, reviewing a thick file filled with legal notes, financial records, and witness statements. At 32 years old, she had become one of the most respected corporate litigation attorneys at her firm. Clients trusted her. Opposing lawyers feared her. And the view from her office looked nothing like the place where her life had once fallen apart. From the outside, everything about Elena's life looked perfect. But success has a strange way of hiding scars. Because 15 years earlier, Elena wasn't sitting in a corner office. She was sleeping in the back seat of a 10-year-old Honda Civic in a grocery store parking lot. 17 years old. Cold. Hungry. And completely alone. But we're getting ahead of the story. Because the moment everything came full circle happened yesterday. At exactly 2:14 p.m. Elena's assistant Jasmine Patel knocked on the glass door. Jasmine was 30 years old, efficient, sharp, and impossible to rattle. She had worked with Elena for almost 4 years and had seen just about everything that could happen inside a high-stakes law firm. But this time, her voice carried something unusual. "Miss Carter," she said carefully, "there are 2 people here to see you." Elena didn't look up immediately. "Do they have an appointment?" No, that wasn't unusual. People often tried to meet Elena without appointments. But the next sentence changed everything. "They say they're your parents." The pen in Elena's hand stopped moving. For a second, she thought she misheard. Her parents? That wasn't possible. Not after 15 years. Not after the night they told her she wasn't welcome in their home anymore. Slowly, Elena looked up. Jasmine was still standing there, watching her closely. "They insisted on waiting," Jasmine added. Elena felt a strange tightening in her chest. 15 years. No calls. No letters. No holidays. No apologies. Nothing. And now suddenly they were here? Why? Her mind began racing through possibilities. Was someone sick? Had something happened to her brother Marcus? Or had they simply decided the past didn't matter anymore? But deep down, Elena knew her parents too well. David Carter didn't show up anywhere unless he needed something. Elena leaned back slightly in her chair. Did they say what they want? Jasmine shook her head. Just that it's important. Of course it was. It was always important when reputation was involved. And if there was one thing Elena's father had cared about more than anything else, it was the family's image. The Carter name. That name had been the reason she was thrown out at 17. Thrown out for embarrassing the family. Even though the truth was far more complicated than anyone in their small town ever knew. Elena stared out the window for a moment. Below her, Chicago traffic crawled through the streets like a slow river of headlights and brake lights. So much time had passed since the last time she saw them. But the memories came back instantly. Her father's voice. Cold. Controlled. Disappointed. "You embarrass this family, Elena." Those were the words he used the night everything collapsed. The night he handed her 2 garbage bags full of clothes and told her to leave. At 17. In the middle of winter. No money. No plan. Just a lesson, he said. A lesson about consequences. And somehow, she survived it. Not easily. Not quickly. But she did. Elena closed the file on her desk. For a moment she considered telling Jasmine to send them away. That would have been the easiest choice. Clean. Simple. Safe. But curiosity has a powerful pull. And there was something else too. A question that had never been answered. Why now? Why after 15 years? Elena stood up slowly. Bring them in, she said. Jasmine nodded and stepped out. 30 seconds later the door opened again, and suddenly the past was standing in front of her. David Carter looked older than she remembered. His shoulders slightly bent, his hair thinner and almost completely gray. Linda Carter stood beside him, clutching her purse with both hands the way she always did when she was nervous. For a moment nobody spoke. The silence stretched across the room like a fragile thread. Elena stayed standing behind her desk. Her father cleared his throat. Elena. The sound of her name coming from him again felt surreal. Like hearing a voice from a life she no longer lived. "Hello, Dad," she said calmly. Her mother attempted a weak smile. "It's been a long time. 15 years. But Elena didn't say that. Instead, she gestured toward the chairs. "Sit down." They sat carefully, as if unsure whether they were welcome. Then finally her father spoke. "Elena, we need your help." 3 words. And suddenly everything made sense. They hadn't come to reconnect. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come because they needed something. But the real shock hadn't happened yet. Because 10 minutes later, this meeting would take a turn none of them expected. The office door would open. Her assistant Jasmine would walk in holding a file. And the words she said next would make both of Elena's parents turn completely pale. Because the problem they came to ask Elena to fix was already sitting on her desk. And when they realized what that meant, everything was about to change. But to understand why her parents were desperate enough to walk back into her life, you need to understand the night they threw her out, and the truth about what really happened. Because the story they told everyone in town wasn't the real story. Not even close. And when that truth finally came out, it would expose something no one saw coming. What kind of mistake gets a 17-year-old thrown out of her own home? Think about that for a moment. Not grounded. Not punished. Not yelled at. Thrown out. The way Elena's father told the story to neighbors later, it sounded simple. His daughter had made a terrible decision. A reckless one. Something that brought shame to the Carter name. And in a town where reputation meant everything, he claimed he had no choice. But that wasn't the truth. The real story started with a phone call. It was a Thursday night in late October. Elena was sitting on the floor of her bedroom surrounded by textbooks and highlighters, preparing for a debate tournament the following weekend. At 17, she was the kind of student teachers loved. Organized. Focused. Responsible. Her future already looked mapped out. College. Law school. Something impressive. Her parents liked to remind people about that future constantly. "My daughter is going to do great things," her father would say at church gatherings. But that night, Elena's phone buzzed beside her notebook. The screen showed a name that instantly made her sit up. Maya. Maya Thompson was Elena's best friend since middle school. The two of them were opposites in a lot of ways. Elena came from a structured home with rules and expectations. Maya's life was messy, unpredictable, and often chaotic. Maya's mother had remarried when they were 14. Her stepfather, Rick Dawson, owned several construction companies and had money. People in town admired him, but something about him had always made Elena uncomfortable. When she answered the phone that night, Maya wasn't speaking clearly. She was crying. Not just upset crying. The kind of crying that makes it hard to breathe. "Elena, I don't know what to do." Elena stood up immediately. "What happened?" There was a pause on the other end. Then Maya whispered something that made Elena's stomach drop. She said Rick had crossed a line. A serious one. One that Maya had been too scared to talk about before. Now she wanted to go to the police. But she didn't want to go alone. "Will you come with me?" Maya asked. It was the kind of moment where you don't have time to calculate consequences. You just react. "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. Within 30 minutes, she was in her car driving across town to pick Maya up. The police station was quiet that night. Too quiet. The kind of place that smells like coffee and old paperwork. Maya told her story to an officer behind a desk while Elena sat beside her, holding her hand. That one decision, just sitting there next to her friend, would change Elena's entire life. because word spread quickly in their small town. And by the next morning, people were talking. Not about Rick Dawson. Not about Maya. About Elena Carter. Why was the bank manager's daughter involved in something so ugly? Why was the Carter name suddenly connected to a scandal? And here was the detail that made everything worse. Rick Dawson wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was one of the largest investors at the regional bank where Elena's father worked as a senior manager. Which meant the situation had suddenly become more than a police report. It had become a reputation problem. By the time Elena walked into her house that evening, the atmosphere felt wrong immediately. The living room lights were on. Her father was sitting at the dining table with a newspaper folded in front of him. Her mother stood near the kitchen sink. Neither of them looked happy. "Elena," her father said slowly. His voice had that cold, controlled tone she knew too well. "Sit down." She did. He slid the newspaper across the table. There was a short article in the local section. It mentioned Maya's report. And in one sentence, it mentioned Elena's name as the friend who accompanied her to the police station. That was all it took. "You had no right to involve yourself in this," David Carter said. Elena blinked. "What do you mean?" "Maya needed help." "This is not our problem," he replied sharply. Elena looked between her parents. Her mother avoided eye contact. "You don't understand," Elena said. "Something serious happened to her." "That's not the point," her father snapped. "The point is our name is now connected to this." Elena felt confusion rising. "So what?" "I didn't do anything wrong." Her father leaned forward. "In this town, perception matters more than what actually happened." That sentence told Elena everything about how he saw the situation. Not as a moral issue. Not as a safety issue. As a public relations problem. "You embarrassed this family," he continued. Elena stared at him. "For helping my friend? You should have stayed out of it." The argument lasted nearly an hour. Voices rose. Doors slammed. Elena tried to explain that Maya needed support. That ignoring something like that would be wrong. But the more she talked, the angrier her father became. Finally, he stood up and walked to the hallway closet. He pulled out 2 large black garbage bags and dropped them on the floor. "Pack your things," he said. At first Elena thought he was bluffing. "Dad, stop. I'm serious." Her mother spoke quietly from across the room. "Maybe this will teach you responsibility." "Responsibility? For what? For doing the right thing?" But the decision had already been made. Within 30 minutes Elena was standing outside the house with 2 bags of clothes and a backpack. The cold air hit her face as the front door closed behind her. No money. No phone. No plan. Just silence. She walked to her car in the driveway. A 10-year-old Honda Civic her parents had planned to sell after she left for college. That car became her home. For weeks. She parked in different places every night so no one would notice. A grocery store lot. A quiet street near the park. Sometimes behind the diner where she eventually found a job. She worked mornings serving coffee, evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store. During the day she still went to school. Most people never knew what she was going through. But surviving those months changed something inside her. The fear slowly turned into determination. If her parents thought she would fail without them, she would prove them wrong. What Elena didn't know yet was that the story about Maya's stepfather wasn't finished. And years later, she would learn something that made that night even more painful. Because someone in her own family knew far more about that situation than she did. Someone who stayed completely silent while she was thrown out. And when she discovered who that person was, it would change the way she saw her entire family. Because the one person who might have stopped her father that night was her brother Marcus. And what he knew would shock her. But that revelation wouldn't come until years later. First, Elena had to survive. And the road from sleeping in her car to becoming the lawyer sitting in that office was harder than anyone could imagine. But the next chapter of her story would reveal something even more surprising. Because the life she built after being abandoned would eventually become the reason her parents came crawling back. And when they realized who Elena had become, they understood something terrifying. They had kicked out the wrong daughter. But what happened next would force Elena to face the hardest decision of her life. Most people assume success happens in one big moment. A lucky break. A sudden opportunity. One life-changing decision. But the truth is usually much less glamorous. Success is built in small, exhausting steps that no one else sees. And for Elena Carter, those steps began in the back seat of a car. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where you realized nobody was coming to save you? That moment changes people. Some give up. Others become unstoppable. Elena chose the second option. The first winter after she was kicked out nearly broke her. Sleeping in a car sounds manageable until the temperature drops below freezing. The windows fog up from your breath. Your back aches from trying to curl into impossible positions. And every noise outside makes you jump awake. But Elena refused to quit school. Every morning she used the locker room at the local community center to clean up before classes. A quick shower. A change of clothes from one of the garbage bags she kept in the trunk. Then she walked into school pretending everything was normal. Most of her classmates never noticed. The few who did assumed her parents had simply become stricter. In small towns, people prefer comfortable explanations. After graduation, Elena knew she had two options. Stay stuck in survival mode, or climb out. Community college became the first step. It was the only education she could afford while working two jobs. Mornings at the diner. Evenings at the grocery store. Late nights studying. The schedule was brutal. For hours of sleep if she was lucky. But something strange happened during those years. The more difficult life became, the more focused Elena grew. Every exam passed. Every class completed. Every scholarship application accepted. Each one felt like a small victory against the voice of her father telling her she would fail. 2 years later, she transferred to a state university. Another scholarship. Another job. More sleepless nights. By 24, she had been accepted into law school. That moment alone felt surreal. Because the girl who once slept in a parking lot now sat in classrooms filled with future judges, prosecutors, and corporate attorneys. And she wasn't just surviving. She was excelling. Law school revealed something about Elena that even she hadn't realized before. She was extremely good at fighting. Not physically, but intellectually. Arguments. Strategy. Evidence. She had a sharp ability to break complicated problems into clear pieces. Professors noticed. One of them once told her something she never forgot. You don't just want to win arguments. You want to expose the truth. That instinct eventually led her into corporate litigation. By the time she was 32, Elena Carter had become one of the most respected attorneys at her firm. Corner office. Major clients. An assistant who handled the chaos of her schedule. On paper, it looked like she had everything. But success doesn't erase the past. It just changes how you carry it. For 15 years, Elena never heard from her parents. No calls. No birthday cards. Nothing. And strangely, that silence hurt almost as much as the night they kicked her out. Because it meant they truly believed their decision had been justified. Then something unexpected happened 2 years ago. Elena ran into someone she hadn't seen since high school. Maya Thompson. Except she wasn't Maya Thompson anymore. She introduced herself as Maya Reynolds. Married. Mother of a 3-year-old daughter. They ran into each other at a coffee shop near Elena's office. For a moment, both women simply stared at each other in shock. Then Maya smiled. Elena. They talked for nearly 2 hours. Catching up. Laughing about old memories. But eventually the conversation turned serious. Elena asked a question she had wondered about for years. Whatever happened with your stepfather? Maya's smile faded. The story she told next shocked Elena. The case had quietly disappeared. No charges. No trial. No public discussion. Why? Because Rick Dawson had money. And connections. Pressure was applied. Witnesses changed their statements. And suddenly the investigation ended. But here was the detail that made Elena's stomach twist. One of the people who helped smooth things over behind the scenes had strong financial ties to the bank where Elena's father worked. In other words, the scandal her father feared so much had been buried. Not solved. buried. And Elena realized something painful. Her parents didn't kick her out because she embarrassed the family. They kicked her out because they wanted distance from the story. They wanted to prove to the town that the Carter family had nothing to do with it, even if that meant sacrificing their own daughter. That realization stayed with Elena for years. But she never reached out to confront them. Some bridges are simply too broken to rebuild. Or so she thought. Until yesterday afternoon. The moment everything came full circle. Elena had been reviewing documents in her office when Jasmine knocked on the door. "Miss Carter, there are 2 people here to see you." Then came the words Elena never expected to hear again. "They say they're your parents." 15 years of silence. And suddenly they were sitting across from her desk. Older. More tired. But still the same people who once believed reputation mattered more than loyalty. The conversation started awkwardly. Small talk. Polite questions. None of it felt real. Finally, Elena's father cleared his throat. "Elena, we need your help." 3 words that confirmed her suspicion. They hadn't come for closure. They had come because they were desperate. Elena thought she had seen it all. She had survived sleeping in a car at 17, working 2 jobs, finishing high school, climbing her way through college and law school. She had built a life nobody thought she could. But nothing prepared her for the look on her parents' faces the moment her assistant, Jasmine, walked in with that file. "Miss Carter," Jasmine said, placing the thick folder gently on the desk. Mr. Langford's team confirmed the hearing date. Her father, David Carter, frowned, confusion crossing his usually stern features. "Who's Langford?" Elena let her voice stay calm, but her eyes sharpened. "Howard Langford. Billionaire. Major investor. And the main plaintiff in the fraud case Marcus is accused of." Her mother's hand went to her mouth. "Wait, you're representing him?" Elena nodded. "I represent Mr. Langford. Marcus's case is on the opposing side." Silence. Thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Her father's hand twitched. "You're suing our son." "I'm not suing him," Elena said evenly. "I'm representing the victims, people who trusted him with their money. People whose lives could be ruined if he isn't held accountable. And legally, ethically, I cannot represent him." Her mother's voice trembled. "But he's family." "And I was family too," Elena replied softly, leaning back in her chair. For the first time in 15 years, the words came out unfiltered. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal. All encapsulated in that one line. "But family doesn't mean ignoring responsibility. You taught me that reputation matters. I'm showing you that integrity matters more." David Carter opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no words. For 15 years, he had believed his decision to throw Elena out was justified, that she had embarrassed the family. And now, confronted with the truth, he saw the irony. Elena continued, calm but unrelenting. "The reason I'm still here, the reason I can do what I do, is because I never stopped fighting. You abandoned me when I needed you most. And yet, somehow I survived. I built a life that no one, not even you, could take away." Her parents shifted in their seats, unsure whether to look down, apologize, or retreat. "And Marcus?" she asked, eyes locking onto theirs. "The people he defrauded trusted him. Families invested their life savings. They trusted your son. And now you want me to help him escape the consequences of his own actions." David shook his head, his voice breaking slightly. We didn't know how bad it was." "Exactly," Elena said. "And that's why I cannot and will not help him cheat justice. Not for you. Not for him. Not for anyone." There was a pause. Then Jasmine, who had been quietly observing, added something that made both of Elena's parents go pale again. "Mr. Carter, you're not the only one who underestimated her. Marcus's case? It's already prepared. All the evidence is on Ms. Carter's desk. He doesn't have a leg to stand on." David's face drained of color. Linda's hands shook. The golden child suddenly seemed anything but golden. Elena leaned forward, the full weight of her years and her survival pressing into the room. 15 years ago, you told me I had destroyed the family name. Tonight, it's clearer than ever, you are the ones who failed to uphold it. And now you're asking me for help." Her parents were silent, incapable of replying. Their arrogance, their belief that control could manipulate outcomes, had crumbled in the face of Elena's success, integrity, and truth. Elena paused. "Let them feel it. Let them understand. You see," she continued, "I didn't just survive. I built a life that thrives on accountability, on doing what's right even when it's hard. And tonight, you're seeing firsthand what happens when you try to control everything without considering what's just." Her father finally whispered, almost inaudibly, We were wrong." Elena didn't respond. Words weren't necessary. She had spent 15 years proving it through action, not argument. She stood up. The city skyline gleamed behind her. She had power now, not because of inheritance or protection, but because of resilience. Every setback, every rejection, every night alone in a car had sharpened her into someone untouchable. Jasmine handed her the Marcus file again. "He has no case, Miss Carter." She nodded. "Exactly." Her parents slowly rose, finally realizing the truth. That the daughter they tried to erase from their lives had become someone whose judgment, ethics, and success eclipsed everything they had tried to control. Elena watched them leave, not with anger or revenge, but with a sense of closure. They had underestimated her. They had abandoned her. And yet, in doing so, they had forged the very person now standing in front of them. As the office door clicked shut behind them, Elena exhaled. 15 years of tension, shame, betrayal, and struggle, all distilled into this moment of quiet triumph. She turned back to Jasmine. "Start preparing the closing documents for Mr. Langford. Marcus won't get away with this." And for the first time in years, Elena smiled, not because of victory, but because she had finally reclaimed her life. The girl they kicked out at 17 had become the woman they could never ignore. But just as she sat down, a thought struck her. This wasn't the end. The Carters would never fully accept accountability. And someday, their choices might come back again in ways she hadn't yet imagined. 15 years of anger, hurt, and unanswered questions had led Elena Carter to this very moment. Sitting back at her desk, she watched the city's skyline stretch out across the horizon, the sun reflecting off glass towers like sparks of her own hard-earned success. For years, she had replayed that night over and over in her mind, the night her parents told her she had embarrassed the family, the night they threw her out with garbage bags in hand. Every word, every look, every cold calculation had been etched into her memory. And now, they had walked into her office, asking for help. She thought about the choices she had in front of her. Could she help Marcus, the golden child who had caused all this chaos? Could she ignore her principles for the sake of family? Could she even forgive them? Elena took a deep breath. 15 years of struggle had taught her something vital. The people who hurt you rarely apologize the way you hope. They rarely recognize the damage they've caused. But life is about reclaiming your own power, and that is exactly what she had done. She looked at the Marcus Carter file again. The evidence was overwhelming. Investors' emails, bank transfers, testimonies. All pointed to deliberate misconduct. Marcus hadn't just made mistakes. He had betrayed trust, and countless people's futures were at stake. Elena had built her career on exposing the truth, on fighting for integrity. And nothing, not even her own family, was going to compromise that. Her father's face had gone pale when Jasmine had handed him the file. Her mother had trembled. They had walked into a room expecting the daughter they discarded to be the same girl they once controlled, the same teenager they thought they could intimidate. Instead, they were confronted with a woman who had survived, grown, and mastered her own destiny. Elena leaned back and spoke softly, as if recounting a lesson they had never learned. "I cannot represent Marcus. Ethically, legally, and morally, it is impossible. But I can make sure he gets the defense he deserves, without compromising the victims of his fraud. And I will ensure he understands the consequences of his actions." David Carter tried to protest, his voice tight and unsure. "But you're our daughter. You could." Elena cut him off gently but firmly. "I was your daughter too. 15 years ago, you threw me out. You abandoned me because my actions supposedly embarrassed you. Tonight, you are here, desperate for help. But the rules haven't changed. Integrity comes first. Responsibility